Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been working at this unique retail store in downtown for about 3 years now. We're pretty well known in our niche, and people often drive from hours away just to shop with us. Parking is absolutely crucial for our business, which is why this whole situation with our next-door neighbor has been such a headache. Our neighbor runs this family-owned landscaping and garden supply store. The bad blood between my boss and him started way before I joined, over some petty argument about an unsightly tree on our property. You know, the kind of ridiculous neighbor drama that somehow turns into a decade-long feud. When businesses started reopening after the pandemic, we noticed a serious problem. Our parking lot, which connects to the landscaping store's lot, was constantly full, but not with our customers. See, our lot is twice the size of theirs, but the landscaper had decided to reserve almost all his spots for his company vans that weren't even there during business hours. So guess where all his customers parked? That's right, in our lot. My boss tried to be reasonable about it. He suggested working something out, offering that their vans could park in our lot when needed if they would free up some spots for their customers. The landscaper immediately refused, insisting those spots were crucial for their vans. When my boss pointed out that the spots were empty most of the day and our customers couldn't find parking, the landscaper dismissed it as not his problem. Finally, my boss threatened to put up a fence to separate the lots. The landscaper just dared him to do it. That was the last civil conversation they had for 2 years. Then something interesting happened. A parking management company approached us with an offer that seemed too good to be true. They'd install automated license plate cameras and handle everything. The first 3 hours would be free, and after that, people would need to pay or get fined. The company would keep the fine money, but we'd get most of the parking revenue. Perfect solution, right? The catch was that they needed to cover both entrances for the system to work. My boss, still trying to be the bigger person, had their representative talk to the landscaper. The rep barely got to start explaining their proposal about benefiting both businesses before the landscaper kicked him out, refusing to even consider turning his lot into a paid parking zone. Instead of spending a fortune on a fence, my boss had a brilliant idea. His construction buddy had these massive landscaping rocks left over from another project. The parking company even offered to cover the cost, knowing they'd make it back through the parking fees. Early Monday morning, this huge guy from the construction company showed up with a crane truck. He started placing the rocks strategically, far enough apart for shopping carts, but too close for cars to slip through. The landscaper came running out, yelling and demanding they stop what they were doing immediately. The worker, completely unfazed, simply told him to step back for his safety. The landscaper, who was about half the size of the worker, just stood there fuming before storming back to his store. Their delivery vans kept trying to use our entrance out of habit. Through our new security cameras, we watched them get stuck and have to make these ridiculous multi-point turns to get back out. One van even scratched itself on a rock trying to squeeze through. The next day, while the parking company was installing the cameras, the landscaper's whole family was out there taking pictures and videos, probably looking for something illegal. But everything was done properly, so they found nothing. A week later, the landscaper's son came into our store looking sheepish. He explained that he'd gotten a parking fine for $150, claiming it was just a mistake because he hadn't realized how long he'd been there. He begged us to waive it. My boss apologetically told him it was out of our hands now, as the parking company handles all the fines. When the son protested that we were neighbors, my boss reminded him that we'd made sure to have the parking company rep explain everything to his father before we installed the system, and wished him a nice day. Now our parking lot is perfectly organized. Our customers can always find spots, and the landscaping family has to deal with their cramped parking situation, exactly what they asked for. They're still getting fined because they keep trying to use our lot out of spite. The boss is basically walking on sunshine these days. Sometimes I catch him staring at those rocks with this proud little grin on his face. Can't blame him. They're probably the best investment we've ever made. Who knew some strategically placed rocks could solve years of parking drama? The landscaper wanted separation between our lots, and well, he got exactly what he asked for, just not quite how he imagined it. I've lived in this neighborhood for over 15 years now, working from home as a freelance writer. This gives me a front row seat to all the neighborhood drama, especially when it comes to our infamous neighbor who moved in 3 years ago. Let me tell you about the most bizarre thing I've ever witnessed. This woman Karen moved in with her 2 teenage kids and 3 dogs. At first, everything seemed normal. She'd wave hello, attend neighborhood barbecues, and complain about typical suburban things like other people's lawn maintenance or garbage bin placement. But everything changed after last year's Independence Day celebrations. One of her dogs, a pampered Pomeranian, apparently developed severe anxiety due to the fireworks. Now, I understand being concerned about your pet's welfare. I have 2 cats myself. But what Karen did next was beyond reasonable. It started with her cornering everyone at the mailboxes to rant about the fireworks. She started complaining loudly about how the government-sanctioned explosions were affecting her precious baby, claiming he hadn't slept properly in weeks. When I suggested trying anxiety wraps for dogs, saying they work well, she snapped back that this wasn't about finding solutions, but about holding people accountable. She insisted that the president needed to answer for this. I thought she was just being dramatic. She started writing letters, not to the local council or state representatives, straight to the White House. She'd proudly show copies to anyone who'd listen. One day, while I was watering my front garden, she came running over with one of her letters. She excitedly announced that she had written her 47th letter to the White House, claiming they couldn't ignore her forever. When I repeated the number back to her, questioning if all these letters were really about her dog's anxiety, she became even more animated. She declared that she was demanding justice, explaining that she wanted the president to personally apologize to her dog. She went on about wanting a handwritten letter, premium treats for life, and a special security blanket with a presidential seal, insisting it was the least they could do after traumatizing her poor angel. When I suggested this might be excessive, she got defensive, arguing that her dog hadn't been the same since their fireworks, and since the president approves these celebrations, he was responsible. This went on for months. She'd send letter after letter, each one more demanding than the last. Then, when summer came around again and more fireworks started going off for various celebrations, she completely lost it. I was sitting on my porch one evening when I saw her storming out of her house with a large package. She was muttering angrily to herself about how they'd been ignoring her, and now they'd have to pay attention. The next morning, all hell broke loose. Black government vehicles swarmed our street. Men in suits were everywhere. Turns out, she had sent a dead raccoon to the White House. Yes, you read that right. A dead raccoon. She'd found it by the side of the road and decided this was a perfectly reasonable way to get attention. I was pulling into my driveway after getting groceries when it happened. The agents rushed her house and within minutes, they were escorting her out. When they led her to the vehicle, she was screaming about government persecution and her dog's rights, still insisting that the president would hear about this. Her teenage kids were at school when it happened. They came home to find their aunt waiting for them. Within a month, the house was up for sale, and the kids moved in with their father in another state. The dogs went with them too, including the anxious Pomeranian who started this whole mess. I later heard from another neighbor who works at the local post office that most of Karen's letters never even made it to Washington. They were so poorly addressed that they kept getting returned, but she'd just resend them with more stamps. The only one that actually made it through was the package with the raccoon, and, well, we all saw how that turned out. The house sold quickly to a lovely retired couple who actually contribute positively to our Neighborhood Watch program. I guess some people really do need to learn the hard way that you can't just send dead animals to the White House and expect it to end well. After my divorce, I needed a steady job that could support my 2 kids, and the portrait studio position at the local retail store seemed perfect. I had always loved photography, started with a hand-me-down camera from my father when I was 12, and it just clicked, pun intended. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was reliable, and the hours were predictable, which was crucial when you're a single parent. The studio was located in what we called a hub town, the kind of place where everyone from the surrounding rural communities would come to do their shopping, banking, and apparently get their photos taken. Most days were pretty routine: family portraits, baby photos, the occasional pet photography session. Those were always interesting. I didn't mind the hour-long commute each way. It gave me time to decompress and plan dinner in my head. My kids were 7 and 8 at the time, and they were real troopers about the whole situation. Their grandmother would watch them after school until I got home, usually around 8:15 p.m. if traffic behaved. It wasn't ideal, but we made it work. They knew bedtime was at 9 p.m., which gave us just enough time for dinner, homework check, and maybe a short story if we were lucky. This incident happened on a Tuesday evening in 1994. I remember because it was picture day at my daughter's school, and the irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent all day taking other people's photos while missing my own kids' school pictures. The studio was quiet that evening. I'd just finished processing the last batch of photos and was starting my closing routine, organizing props, cleaning the lens filters, and updating the appointment book. The wall clock showed 6:50 p.m., and I was looking forward to getting home at a decent hour for once. Then the phone rang. I answered with my usual greeting, offering help from the portrait studio. The woman on the other end immediately announced she was on her way with her 2 kids to get photos taken. Her voice had that particular tone, the one that makes retail workers everywhere cringe. I checked the clock again, hoping maybe I'd read it wrong. I pointed out that it was 6:50 and reminded her that we close at 7. She acknowledged this, but explained that's why she was calling, to let us know they were coming. She mentioned they lived in Pine Grove and insisted they'd be there by 7 o'clock. Pine Grove was a small farming community about 20 minutes away, on a good day, with no traffic, and assuming you hit all the green lights. I'd been down this road before. I said I would be leaving at 7, as that was our closing time. She insisted that's why she was calling, to make sure I would wait for them. When I repeated that I wouldn't be there, she became increasingly frustrated, explaining that her kids were already dressed and had to get their pictures taken tonight. I thought about my own kids, probably sitting at their grandmother's kitchen table right now, working on homework and wondering when mom would be home. I tried explaining that while I understood her situation, we closed at 7, and I needed to leave then to see my own kids before bedtime. I offered to make her an appointment for later in the week, mentioning our last appointment time was 6:30. She responded by hanging up on me. At 7:15 p.m. as I was walking to my car, I saw a minivan speeding into the parking lot. The woman behind the wheel was red-faced and clearly angry. She parked crooked across 2 spaces and jumped out, dragging 2 exhausted-looking kids behind her. She confronted me in the parking lot, demanding to know where I thought I was going since she'd told me they were coming. I calmly reminded her that we closed at 7 and it was now 7:15. She became more agitated, insisting they were there now and the kids were dressed up, then demanded to speak to my manager. What she didn't know was that I'd already called my manager right after her phone call, knowing this might happen. Store policy backed up closing time strictly. It was a liability issue. I told her that my manager had left at 7 a.m., just like I was doing, and offered to help her schedule an appointment for the next day, when we opened at 10 a.m. She exploded, saying this was ridiculous, complaining about driving all that way, and threatening to call corporate. I simply told her that was her right and pointed out that their number was posted on the door, along with our business hours. She started taking pictures of the store hours sign with her camera, which was ironic given the situation, presumably for her complaint. When I walked to my car, I could hear her loudly telling her kids that some people just don't care about customer service anymore. The next day, my manager told me corporate had indeed received the complaint. They responded with a form letter restating our posted business hours and included a $5 off coupon for her next visit. She never came back, but the story became a legend at our store. We even started putting a note in our phone greeting stating that the last appointment of the day was at 6:30 p.m. No exceptions. It was supposed to be a perfect celebration. My dad had just turned 70, and as his only child, I wanted to make sure everything was special. I'd spent weeks planning this dinner at his favorite steakhouse, the same place he'd taken me for special occasions throughout my childhood. I'd even managed to get his favorite corner booth reserved, the one with the vintage photographs of the city from the 1950s that he always loved looking at. We were having such a great time. My mom was showing everyone old pictures on her phone, and my dad was in the middle of telling one of his famous stories about his days as a high school teacher. That's when I needed to use the bathroom. I walked over to the restroom area and tried the door handle. It was locked, so I did what any normal person would do. I waited. A minute later, this guy walks out and immediately starts going off on me. He began yelling at me, asking what was wrong with me and if I'd ever heard of knocking. He accused me of trying to barge in. I replied back, telling him that the lock was literally there for that purpose, and reminded him this wasn't his house but a public restroom. He got even more worked up, telling me that where he came from, people knocked first and tried to lecture me about manners. I shot back that where I came from, we used locks for their intended purpose, and tried to end the conversation there. I went into the bathroom, did my business, and when I came out, he was still there, trying to continue the argument. He tried to stop me, telling me we weren't done and that I needed to learn some respect. I told him I had nothing more to say and suggested he remember next time that he's in a public place, not his private bathroom. I walked away. As I was settling back into our booth, I saw him storming over to our table with this self-righteous look on his face. He had apparently gathered his 3 friends for backup. He approached my dad and started complaining about how disrespectful I was. My dad looked at him calmly while I explained what actually happened. My dad tried to defuse the situation by suggesting they take the discussion outside, mentioning it was his 70th birthday celebration with family. The guy refused, insisting they handle it right there since that's where it happened. My dad calmly declined to argue and politely asked them to leave us alone and enjoy their evening. Instead of backing off, he and his friends did something I still can't believe. They reached over and grabbed handfuls of my dad's birthday dinner and started throwing it around. One of them knocked over our drinks. When the waiters tried to intervene, one of these jerks pushed the waiter so hard he crashed into another server carrying a tray of food. The restaurant manager came running over, and I've never seen someone switch from laid back to fierce so quickly. He ordered them all to leave, informing them that security was on the way and the police had been called. The guy tried to protest, claiming they were paying customers. The manager shut him down quickly, telling them they were no longer customers but trespassers, and told them they'd be paying for all damages in our meal. The manager pulled up their payment information from earlier and their reservation details. Turns out one of these idiots was some mid-level executive at a local company. The manager made it very clear that if they didn't pay for everything immediately, our meal, the dropped food, and the cleanup, the security footage would be sent directly to their employers and the police. You should have seen how quickly they pulled out their credit cards. The manager even comped our entire meal and brought out a fresh birthday cake for my dad. The look on that guy's face when he had to pay for 2 expensive meals, his own and ours, plus damages, was priceless. Last I heard, despite paying for everything, they still got banned from the restaurant for life. My dad still jokes about it being his most memorable birthday dinner ever, though not for the reasons we planned. At least we got a great story out of it, and those jerks got hit where it hurts most, their wallets. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.